Okay, let's get started. It's a little cooler in here than out there. Anyway, I'm George Riley. I'm Managing Director of Public Water Now. Everybody knows what we're up to. We plan on starting collecting signatures in October and hope to have enough signatures to be convincing in April. We'll submit all those to the Water Management District Board for a decision. Their decision, there's kind of a fork in the road for them. Their decision is either to adopt what's been presented to them, because it's an ordinance, so we're proposing a new law, an ordinance. They either adopt it or they send it to the voters. And if they send it to the voters, it'll be a November 2018 election. And just as a reminder, in November of 2018, every mayor's race will be on that same ballot, and half the city council races will be on that same ballot. So Public Water Now, or the issue of public ownership, will be on the ballot at the same time with these other elections. And there will be some crossover discussion, I'm sure. So let me give a couple of quick announcements before we get to our program. We all know about your water bill. I mean, you know about your water bill, and we know about it in general. But PUC just approved a small rate increase for Cal-Am, which will be implemented over the next couple months. But it's a small one by comparison. They've asked for a 22% rate increase over 3 years. And that's to be discussed at the PUC level, but since it's taking so long, and Cal-Am's putting pressure on PUC decided, well, we'll make an interim decision to authorize a modest, we don't know what the number is yet, rate increase consistent with cost of living. So there will be a rate increase on your bill coming up soon. The entire 22% issue is still to be resolved. Some of us are opposing that, simply saying, what have they done that costs so much? 22% over 3 years. That's 7% a year. That's more than double cost of living increase. But that's what Cal-Am wants. So you know what our issue is with Cal-Am. We do want to make a call out for those people who are willing to participate in our campaign. This is a signature gathering campaign to participate with house parties. So we have a few people who have been willing to say, I'll open up my house, I'll invite my neighbors in, and small or large, doesn't matter. But we want to reach out to people through house parties to the extent that we can. We're still looking for people to step up and say, yes, I will participate that way. Let us know on the website, let Gene Turner know, let Pat Benson know, let somebody know that you're willing to do that. We'll arrange a schedule later, but we do want that from the community. We expect to have a kickoff party on October the 11th in Seaside at the Laguna Grande Park. We're going to have a band, we're going to have a party, and we're not going to be asking for money. What did I say? 11. And what is it? 7. Then I'm only managing director up to a point, then everybody else manages. So it is the 7th, it's a Saturday, right?
Yes.
Okay, sorry about that. Anyway, it'll be announced. And we're not going to be asking for money, but you know, that's always an option. But we just hope to have a nice party, a nice collection of people, and so on. American Water Friendship Society, or some phrase like that, has joined the next door communication loop. So just to alert you to that, Cal-Am has decided to be a neighbor in the loop of contacts that, anyway, it was kind of a surprise to us that they present themselves like a small business, because that's really what it's about. It's about neighborhood issues and local issues, and Cal-Am has decided to join as a neighbor. Also, and you'll get an email on this very soon, those of you who are interested, the Cal-Am Board of Directors is holding a meeting in 2 days in town. There is a Board of Directors for Cal-Am. They did hold a meeting once here in PG about 3 or so years ago. But anyway, they'll be in town on Wednesday, the 13th, 2 days from now, at 5:30 at the Monterey Plaza Hotel. There was a month or so ago, another event there, and we decided to show up, and want to be invited in or be aware, call attention to the fact that here was a meeting without public access, without transparency. And we're all about transparency, but sometimes the other side isn't. So we were just calling attention to that. So we got invited in, and that was that. Anyway, the same type of dynamic may exist coming up on Wednesday. It's at 5:30 in the evening, Monterey Plaza Hotel. Those of you who might be interested in showing up, we'll put a call out, probably tomorrow, maybe tonight, to remind people of that. So much for that. The reason we have feasibility as the subject, and it's probably the most important subject there is on public ownership. We've talked about eminent domain. We're trying to demystify some of these subjects. We've talked about bond financing. We've talked about a number of things over the years about water and so on, and you know that. And there are other options about water supply. And we've had various discussions about that. But what we have never had so far, and it is not a total mystery, but the question of feasibility is the question that we want the Water Management District to address. That's the nature of our petition, our initiative. It's to demand that they do a feasibility study. Now, they can start it early, they can start it late, but they can do it sometime. We're going to get the signatures. Everybody knows that. So the demand is going to be on the Water District to perform. What are they going to do? What is it about feasibility that is the big question? What we have here today, and who we have here today, is Richard Hajas from Ojai. They just had a recent successful experience in the takeover steps of their program. Richard will tell us about the process they used, tell us about the cautions they had going in, talking about some of the conclusions they came to, what kind of dynamics they developed going forward. But the issue is feasibility. What is that about? What is it that's convincing? What is their experience? We had a convincing experience. We had a discussion of Missoula, Montana's successful experience. They had some of the same things they had to go through, but that was in Montana. This is California. This is the experience in California. This is the law we have to work with. These are the requirements we have to meet in California. And it was the same issue. It was a community that wanted public ownership. They had to go forward. Let's just have to go forward. I'm going to turn now over to Richard because that's what we want to hear more about. There'll be plenty of Q&A time on feasibility, but Richard, you're on. Thank you. What I didn't say is Richard has more than 30 years experience in running public water systems, so he knows the finances there. He had to check out the finances on the private side.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to go through kind of an overview of the process that we went through and focus particularly on my role, which was a feasibility study. I have a PowerPoint and it's got some charts with numbers in it. If you can't read them, don't worry about it. It's mostly for help me along with content here. Everything that we have done, we have a huge library of documents on our website, ojai.com. You'll find the feasibility study, court hearing, court decisions. You'll find everything that we have done on that website. Anyway, this is Ojai. This is my hometown, and this is at 5 o'clock in the morning, I'm sure, because otherwise it would be full of traffic and there'd be no place to park. Ojai is it's just a little east of Santa Barbara in Ventura County. It's up in the mountains, about 25 miles north of city of Ventura. So it sits up in the mountains away from the coast by about 25 miles. It's hot there. This isn't hot. It was 108 degrees last week and it was raining, so very unusual for us. As a small town, we have a population of about 5,000 to 6,000. There's 2,950 connections. So I told the group this morning, you can take what I present and in your case, just add a 0 to everything because you're much bigger than this small community of Ojai. But It's funny how it turns out. If you add a zero to the dollars, add a zero to the population and the connections, it's pretty close to the same. It's our community, it's primarily tourism. Our biggest employer is the Ojai Valley Inn. It's a 5-star resort. A lot of artists, a lot of movie stars, and you know, your first perception of it is full of very wealthy people, but that really isn't true. There are a lot of wealthy people that live there or own property there, but the core of the community are small residential lots, a lot of retired people, a lot of families, a lot of single elderly people, and they can't afford the kind of water rates that we're paying. 1,900 of the 2,950 connections were residential lots under 10,000 square feet. Ojai Flow is made up of a 7-member committee. The same members started in 2010, and they were still there at the end. Each one of them played a specific role. Pat McPherson is our chairman. Unfortunately passed away 2 weeks ago, and he was the bulldog that kept everybody going. He was the PR guy, walking the streets with petitions, getting the vote out, and he was afraid he wasn't going to make it to see the final conclusion, but fortunately he did. All of the other people had specific roles. There were fundraisers, some of them were excellent at it. There were the political types that knew how to maneuver the community. Some were activists, business people, but each of us played a role. My role, I was the numbers guy, so I didn't really have much to do with the political side of it, although I helped. But I prepared the numbers and prepared the feasibility analysis for them. All of us were volunteers. No one was paid or received any money at all. And as I said, we began meeting in 2010. Our meeting started about a rate case that we thought we could, influence the outcome of, which we couldn't. But we met every Tuesday for 7 years without fail, except for Christmas holidays. That was the only time off. We spent over a year fooling with the PUC, trying to come up with ways to have a voice. Just trying to intervene was pretty much impossible. The city was small, didn't have a lot of interest in it, so they didn't help a whole lot. We submitted letters, testimony, we did everything we thought we could do, and at the end we finally concluded this is a waste of time and we're not going to do this anymore. We have to replace Golden State with something else. This is the timeline. October 10th is when we started to meet, or to answer the key questions on how to proceed. We published the feasibility study in March 2011. It took me about 4 months to prepare it. In May 2011, we circulated a petition, and it was an informal petition simply to request that the Casitas Municipal Water District proceed with a taking of Golden State. We had a registered voter population probably in the neighborhood of 3,500, and in 2 weeks we collected 1,900 signatures. And the feasibility study was the basis of the request for signatures. In January 2013, which is a long way away after we submitted that petition, Casitas finally came out and said, we're proposing to form a community services district and have an election to issue bonds. So almost 2 years went by, and we didn't hear much from them at all. They did hold an election, and the election was in August 2013, and we needed 2/3 majority because of the property bond issue, and 87% of the voters voted in favor. Right before the election, the lawsuits began. Golden State tried to get an injunction to prevent the election from occurring. The judge said, nah, let's have the election and see what happens. Then following the election, they filed another lawsuit. They sued us over the bonding mechanism. Went to court, they lost the case. They went to the appellate court, they lost the appeal, and they appealed to the Supreme Court of California. The Supreme Court turned down, refused to refer it back to the appellate court. Now, those are three things that happened, but it took forever. We had Golden State attorneys, relatives pass away, so they needed time to go to their funerals. I mean, there were every excuse that you can imagine to delay. And the delay is an important tool for them. We had a petition, we had a feasibility study, and we had an election. As time goes on, people forget, people move, things change. So that is one of their strategies, is to make this thing last as long as it possibly can. Finally, on June 7th of this year, Casitas Water District took over operations. They were handed the keys. It was a result of a negotiated settlement. So today we're receiving water from Casitas Water District, and Golden State Water is gone. How we got there? After a lot of turmoil, and you know, anybody that gets involved in this kind of thing knows there's a lot of noise. You know, everybody at the table is trying to help, has their own issues. We start talking about things that were totally unrelated to what we were trying to do. So we made a real effort to hone in on what exactly we're trying to accomplish and what are the tasks that we have to do. The first one, we have to define the problem. We have to make it very clear what the problem is. Is the problem that we don't like Golden State? Is the problem their service is inferior? Is the problem that their leaks are tearing up the city streets? Is the problem their water quality? Is the problem their customer service? Or is the problem something else? Then we had to address the next important question: who's going to replace Golden State? We have to have someone that can come in here and operate that system and provide us with water. The next is, can we afford it? We knew we were going to have to pay a lot of money to have this done. So can we afford it? Are we going to wind up with a benefit at the end of all of this? And then, of course, how do we fund it? How are we going to pay for all of this? The problem is, we all decided the problem is related to one thing: money. It's all about money. It's about the difference in the rates all of our neighbors were paying, 4 or 5 other water purveyors in our small Ojai Valley, versus what we were paying. We had people whose neighbor across the street was paying 1/3 of what his neighbor was paying for water. So we've honed in on that. This isn't about anything else. This is about money. So we defined the problem. Then we agreed on a set of rules of engagement. We all have to be singing the same song when we go out there and talk to the public, because there's nothing that will create chaos like one member of our group saying one thing and another saying another, using the wrong numbers, citing the wrong references, making comments that are politically charged. So we decided these are our rules of engagement. One, stay away from partisan issues. Our community is politically charged, like most all are now. So there was all these different groups with different political motivations, with political points of view. We decided there's a group that just hates corporations, so they don't believe the corporation should own the water. There was another group that was opposed to that they didn't think eminent domain was the way to do it. And then you had others that had other points of view. My particular point of view, I thought the PUC was the biggest problem we had. If I owned Golden State, I'd operate it the same way. It's a great way to make money. But the PUC was supposed to protect us. And so my beef was with them. But we tried to keep that out of it. Just focus on one. The other thing is, we firmly believe that this is about a long-term issue. My kids live in that community, and so did many of the other members of our group. This is about the long term. You're not going to save $1 jillion the first year. We're hoping you can save something, but what we're looking at is the long-term savings and the long-term impact of this community. Golden State was taking $6 million a year out of our community. The economic impact of that is huge. You get an economist to explain how that impacts the community, it's pretty big. In your case, it's probably $60 million a year. That's a big impact to have that money exported from your community. So we look at the long term. We documented all the sources of our data, all the sources of our comments, and you'll see them in the feasibility study. 90% of the references are Golden State's own words from their own documents. We avoid subjective statements. There's nowhere in that feasibility study where we ever comment on Golden State's ability to operate the system. We just left that to the side, even though they had some real problems. It wasn't an issue you could easily, objectively argue. Focus on the small customer, the 1,900 people. Those are the people that are going to vote. Those are the people we have to show there's a benefit to. It was obvious that the big water users were going to benefit no matter what. But we had to make this plan work for those 1,900 people, or 1,900 parcels. Be conservative in our statements and our estimates. It's far better to overstate how much it's going to cost than to understate how much something's going to cost. That way we have some room. And then once we completed the feasibility study, it was kind of like our Bible. These are the facts. We would be happy to talk to anyone, anytime, about what was contained in that feasibility study. Now we had to pick who is going to operate it, and I know for you that's a major issue, and it was for us. We had a multitude of water purveyors in the area, some of them very small. We had the city of Ojai, which was very small. They had no experience in running a utility. There was a lot of desire to, keep this thing under their control and have the city run it. But the city didn't serve, the service area wasn't entirely in the city, so we had areas in the unincorporated area that were going to have to be taken over. And honestly, the city didn't have the resources or the expertise to do this. We looked at some county water districts, local county water districts that were neighbors to us. They weren't interested. We looked at, anyway, we had the Casitas Municipal Water District. We were within their political boundaries already. We paid taxes to them, and they sold supplemental water to Golden State Water. They had pipelines running through the city. They had big reservoirs. They had everything that was really necessary to take on the service. They had the expertise, the staff, the resources. They served a population of about 60,000, 20,000 acre feet a year. So it was an easy task for them to take it over. The problem is that Ojai, the community of Ojai doesn't have a lot of friends. It's a community that is full of a little bit of self-importance, I guess. But so the area around it, City of Ventura, Casitas, they were very reluctant to deal with us. The Casitas board had 5 board members, only one represented our area, and he only represented, our area was a very small part of his total district. So even though he was friendly, he had a good number of his supporters who were outside our area, not that friendly. So we knew it was going to be a difficult task to convince the Casitas Water District to do this.
I just want to add editorially, this is the most focused discussion in the public today on the very issue we're talking about. So of all the things we've talked about in the past that kind of been on the edges, this is right down the middle. So this is important stuff for us.
What does Casitas stand for?
I would say Casitas Municipal Water District. Casitas is I think it's an Indian or Spanish name for some local. It used to be called the Ventura River Project, and they changed the name. Anyway, I've already gone over some of the pluses and minuses of Casitas being the one to take over. Whoever does it has to have the power of eminent domain, so that was an important element. And they obviously have to have the resources to do it. Like I said, they were a reluctant participant, so that became a problem. Anyway, we finally, after quite a while, decided to go with Casitas. It made the feasibility study easier because they were an operating water district. They had a lot of records. I had experience. I was the assistant general manager there in charge of operations for 15 years, so I knew how they operated, was familiar with their finances. So it made it a little easier to do a comparison. Okay, the next task after we figured out who was going to do it is we had to figure out how much it was going to cost. And this is the most difficult part of all of this. There's the acquisition costs, lawyers, the expert witnesses, Casitas administrative time, all of these things that we're going to have to focus in on just through the process that may fail. So we're going to need this money just to start. The purchase price, we'll get into that. That was something we had to do. And the other problem was there were needed improvements that we made claims that the system was in very poor shape. So we had to have resources to fix those things and replace some very expensive pieces of infrastructure. On the legal cost side, we talked a lot with your neighbor Felton. They did this successfully a few years ago. They were very helpful for us. They told us they spent about $1 million. And they didn't go all the way to condemnation because they had a settled agreement. We decided that we're going to need a lot of money to do this, and a lot of time. We figured it would take 5 years. So we estimated we would need $4 million. We figured if we didn't make that number big, you could easily convince Golden State to just keep going and we'd run out of money. So we made that number fairly large. Okay. Now the purchase, estimating how much it was going to cost to buy it. This is the difficult thing. Every lawyer will tell you that the laws in California and the United States require that whenever a government agency acquires private property, they have to pay for fair market value. And how to determine that fair market value, there's a variety of ways, but that's a constitutional right that every property owner has. So how do we determine the fair market value of a publicly regulated utility? We had people telling us, you need to go out and do an appraisal, count every nut and bolt, valve, every foot of pipe, and come up with a value of that system. And we avoided that at all costs, and I would advise you don't do that. That is not going to help you. The city of Claremont went down this road and failed. And part of it was the way they appraised it, and they had other issues as well. But they went to condemnation, and the judge ruled in favor of Golden State. The key to the value of a public utility is their rate base. They publish that every year in their financial statement that they issue to the PUC. And the rate base is essentially the total undepreciated value of the plant, the infrastructure. Undepreciated value. in doing this, I did some research on what the PUC is all about. The PUC was originally formed by the federal government back in the days of the railroad. And the federal government wanted the railroad to expand west and expand to all communities, as many as possible. They didn't want the railroad companies to cherry pick routes so that they wouldn't go to the little town, 100 miles off the main track because it would cost too much. And they wanted to also make sure that the railroads charged fair tariffs. They didn't want to make special deals with one steel company over another or one agricultural business over another. They wanted fair tariffs for everyone. So the PUC basically made a deal with the railroad. You set your tariffs based on your operating costs, and we'll make sure you get 100% reimbursed on your operating costs. And we'll approve your tariffs. But if you go out and expand, when you spend capital on improving the system, we will guarantee you a return on that investment, no matter what. So if they added rail, they would be able to get a return of 8, 10, 12% on that investment until it was paid off in their rates. And the rates were spread equally among everyone. Basically what happened, they do the same thing now with public utilities. So the utility is not really a water company operating a water business selling a product for profit. It's more like a bank. It gets money, either borrows it or it gets it from its investors, and it invests in new pipes, new wells, or whatever it is, and before it invests, it gets approval by the PUC for a guaranteed return and a guaranteed principal payment. In our case, their principal payment was about 3.5% per year, and the guaranteed return on investment was 8.5%. That 8.5% was their profit. So the more money they spent on capital improvements, the more money they made. Paying on operations, investing in something that would improve efficiency doesn't help them at all. They just keep operating the way they are, turn the bill in, and they get paid. So this rate base is really the key. And to give you an example, where I live in a housing tract that I live in, the developer 30 years ago went in and put in water pipes, valves, pumps, whatever it took to serve that new development. And when it was done, dedicated those to Golden State Water. Golden State Water now owned those. They didn't pay a dime for it, but they owned those. And they were charged with operating and maintaining them, and they would get reimbursed for the cost of that. Now someday, if they had to replace them, they could invest capital in that, and then they would get a return on that investment. So the bulk of the system that they operated was already paid for, or paid for by somebody else. It was only the rate base that was the part that basically we owed them, that they lent to us to make improvements. And that was really all we owed them. The second element of this is that because that's how the PUC sets rates, if you put that water company for sale on the free market, and someone came in and paid more than the rate base for it, they wouldn't be able to recuperate that difference in cost. Because the PUC simply looks at it and says, no, your rate is based on how much capital is invested that hasn't been depreciated and hasn't been returned. So just because you paid more for it, that isn't the ratepayer's problem. And there was a case in Chandler, Arizona, where that happened, where two privately owned companies, one bought the other and paid more than the rate base for it, and went to the PUC and said, well, this is how much we have invested, this is how we have to set our rates. Said, no, that isn't how it works. So they all know that. And if you think about it, why I mean, if that were the case, these things would be turning over all the time, because you would get somebody to buy it for a little bit more, and they get to collect a little bit more. So logic tells you that the fair market value is only the amount that you can receive a profit on, and that would be the rate base. The problem with the rate base is it's a moving target. Golden State, the PUC sets a depreciation rate. So existing undepreciated assets are depreciated each year by a given amount, 3.5% in our case. And they're continuously investing new capital into it. So we had to look at, on the day we finally get to buy them, how much is it going to be worth, right? When we started, it was worth about $13 million. When we ended, it was closer to $30 million. So we had to be able to account for that change over time. Fortunately, Golden State published a 10-year, or a 20-year actually, master plan in 2010. And they submitted that master plan to the PUC to show how they were going to invest in improving the system. It was a $27 million master plan. And in your case, I would say $270 million. So that gave us the ability, and they had a schedule, they gave us an ability to go to the current rate base, figure out how much that was going to depreciate over 5 years or 10 years, go to their capital improvement plan and figure out how much they were going to reinvest, and we could project where that rate base was going to be in future years. Oh, no, it's okay. Kind of the same. I've already kind of gone over that. It's a moving target, and you can see, if you can, 2010, it was about 14 million. And 2017 or 18, it's up to $24 million. So it increased significantly, and they aggressively tried to do that. We had a well project, a well that had a lot of experience constructing wells, and this well could have been easily constructed for $1 million or less, cost them $2.5 million, and they got reimbursed for that and an 8.5% return on that.
Mm-hmm. Please see them Americans.
And that's part of what you have to understand. There is no incentive on Golden State's part to understate their operating costs, to control those costs in any meaningful way, and there is no incentive for them to economize on their capital investment projects. If you can invest $1 million at 8.5%, and you know you could double that and still get your 8.5%, that's what you're going to do. And the only one you have to determine whether it's right or not is the PUC. Now these are some other costs that you have to factor in addition to the rate base, and this will depend on your own particular situation. Real property that they own is not depreciated. So if they own a substantial amount of real property like they did in Felton, you have to factor that in. But it does have a value to the buyer as well. You also have to factor in the court often awards lost revenue for some period of time to give the seller an opportunity to reinvest that money. Golden State Water claimed that they had water rights. That was a completely false claim, and we knew they didn't. So they said it was worth $80 million, but we knew that wasn't true. The other thing that was a surprise at the very end are the RAM charges. You may be familiar with their famous surcharges that they had on your bill. Well, in our case, a combination of overstating water sales projections and the drought and the 25% mandatory reduction, our RAM charge at the end was over $4 million. So we had to factor that in. Again, we also knew we had to make needed improvements. They gave us a $27 million master plan to work off of. rather than, we knew it was overstated, we knew that simply if Casitas took over, some of those things wouldn't be needed because they already had them. So we knew it was high, but we used it anyway. Rather than argue, we used that as the amount we needed to improve the system. As they spent money throughout the process, that number came down. So we had this sliding scale of time, depreciation, reinvestment, rate base moving all around. So we put together this scale, and what we projected, by the time we figured in 5 years that we would be able to acquire it, it would cost us $41 million. That's legal costs, acquisition costs, and the needed money to make the improvements. So now we knew how much it cost, and then we had to figure out if we could afford it. So what we did is we took a look at Golden State's operating costs. And this is excluding their profits and their taxes, just their bare operating costs. And it was costing them, according to them, $2.1 million a year to provide service to 2,950 connections. I've been in the water business a long time. That's very high. So I felt really comfortable with dealing with that number. They also included in their costs $775,000 for administrative costs. Their headquarters is 100 miles away from us, and that's where the battery of lawyers and accountants reside. Casitas had its own administration. The addition of our small amount of services was not going to cost them that much money, and they didn't have to go to the PUC. So we deducted that from their operating costs. They also paid rent because they didn't own anything in the city. Casitas already had offices and facilities, so we deducted that. We added $250,000 to Casitas' operations for the continuous leak repair that we knew they were going to have to do for at least for a while. I mean, they had like 168 leaks a year. I mean, it's pretty significant. It's hard to drive around in town without hitting a pothole. So we concluded that Casitas could operate the system as is in the terrible shape it's in for $1.5 million a year and be able to charge the rates that they charge. Now what we had to contend with is Casitas said, no impact to us. You cannot use a dime of our existing ratepayers' money to fund this. We cannot take on anybody that requires more water, because we don't have any more water. And we were able to answer that. We said, we are willing to pay our own way. And we'll set it up so Casitas doesn't have to front any money. We had our own water supply, so the water situation wouldn't change at all. Casitas was sold water to Golden State on a supplemental basis, and that wouldn't change. Benefit to Casitas is Casitas would, for the first time, have its finger in the groundwater basin, which it's been coveting for some time. So this was an opportunity to get into that and do some conjunctive use management of that basin, which it needed. The other thing is it would increase their net revenues by $1.9 million a year. And the reason is because Casitas was primarily a wholesaler. It sold to the city of Ventura, to other water companies, to agriculture, and it only had about 3,000 residential customers. Well, residential customers are the backbone of a water company. That's where your base revenue comes from. They always pay their bill. They have a meter charge. They always use some water. So doubling the size of that customer base was an incentive for them. It's hard to get a public agency to admit there might be some profit in something. They operated no profit. But I knew they knew it, that this was a benefit. So that would have helped quite a bit in enticing them to go forward. So we knew how much it was going to cost. We had a purveyor to operate it. Now can we afford it? Well, the differential between the rates that Golden State was charging us in 2010 and what Casitas would charge us was $3.1 million. So we figured we have $3.1 million today to buy Golden State. Okay. So now that we've figured that out, how are we going to fund it? And funding is a very difficult process, and the choices are somewhat limited. We talked about having a general bond issue. Well, in a general bond issue, the way property taxes are now with Prop 13, one homeowner may have an assessment of $80,000 on their property, and then there's a neighbor who bought it a year ago has $1 million. So there's no way to do an assessment based on the tax appraisal. It would be inequitable. If you do a flat assessment like the school district did, they did a $100 per parcel assessment, that's not equitable because someone that uses a lot of water on a big parcel is only paying $100, the same as someone with a small residential lot. So we didn't see that as a very viable way to go. We also knew that to do a bond issue takes a 2/3 majority. And that's a hurdle that's been difficult for almost any of these public agencies in our community to surpass. So we decided to go with a water surcharge, issue revenue bonds that are simply be repaid on guaranteed revenues. And we looked at a variety of different types, different approaches. One, finance the whole thing all at once. I think that's the next slide. Finance the entire $41 million on a revenue bond. We had a debt service of about $2.6 million a year, and we'd have a water surcharge of over $3.25 per unit. The problem with that is that it really made that first year savings really small, especially for the small residential customer. And we didn't think it was enticing enough to get people to say yes to approving $41 million in bonds. So we did a little twist on that. We'd issue a certain number of bonds, about 26 million, to reimburse Casitas for some of its costs and to do the buyout. The improvements would be paid for by the surplus in the surcharge. There would be a small surplus each year, and the net surplus revenues Casitas would gain by operating our system. And then we would fix the system over time. That would result in a $2.50 per unit surcharge, and everyone would benefit immediately if we were to do that. That's just a breakdown of how the bonds would be used. The next issue, as I said before, we were interested in the long term, not the short term. So in our proposal, the small user would save $25 bi-monthly. The whole community would save from $500,000 to almost $1 million the first year. But we wanted to see what was going to happen in the future. So I went back and I looked at the history of Golden State's water rate increases over 20 years, and then looked at Casitas' history of water rate increases over 20 years. Golden State averaged 8% per year over that 20-year period. They increased their rates as high as 35% in 1 year. Then we looked at Casitas. Casitas increased their rates an average of 4% each year over that 20-year period. The highest increase was 13%, and that was because they built a filtration plant that they were trying to fund. The average rate of inflation during that same period was like 3% or something like that. So it was pretty obvious that there was a long history of Golden State increasing rates, and there was no reason to believe that they wouldn't continue to do that. One of the reasons we knew they would continue to do that is because their $27 million capital improvement plan had to be paid for through a rate increase, which would by itself amount to 50% rate increase. So if you take that, plus their continued increase in cost of operations, we felt that that 8% was probably conservative. Casitas, on the other hand, is a local elected board of directors that has to answer to the public. Raising the rates is very hard for them. Plus, we had the protection of Prop 218. If they did decide to propose a rate increase that was outrageous, we have the legal right to petition them and to stop that increase. We have no such right with PUC. In our proposal, the other thing that we tried to do, and it's in the feasibility study, is be able to tell people exactly how this would affect them. So I put together a big Excel spreadsheet that was like a small calculator, big calculator. And somebody could tell me, give me their water bill, and I can plug it in there, put in the surcharge, see what they were paying Golden State, and tell them what they were going to pay under this proposal. All the major businesses, the local government agencies, I did that for all of them, so I could show them this is the impact to you. For the small customer, the impact was about $25 bi-monthly in the first year. For the community, about almost $1 million. But then we looked at what's the long-term impact. And the long-term impact to the individual customer was hundreds of dollars a month in 10 years, the difference. For the community, it was $20 million in 10 years, $32 million difference with the surcharge. So you're not only paying $32 million less, you own the system. And that was in 15 years. Again, though, this is a moving target. We presented that feasibility study with all those numbers, met with the community, showed them how it would impact them, and Casitas then proposed a whole new plan. When they accepted it, they said, we're not doing revenue bonds. We cannot count on selling enough water to pay for this. And even if we do, the revenue bonds are going to cost a lot more than conventional property bonds. So we will not do revenue bonds. The risk to our other customers is too high. The other is we accept the basis of their feasibility study. We believe it's sound, but we're not going to a gunfight with a knife. So we want $60 million to make sure that we have enough money to make this thing work. Because we're not going to go down the road and spend a bunch of money and have to back out of it. So that was their proposal, $60 million property bond. The problem is they came up with a new idea to use a Mello-Roos bond, a Mello-Roos assessment. This was something that was developed after Prop 13 to deal with some of those issues. And Mello-Roos has some peculiarities that allow you to assess each property differently based on the benefit to that property. So they did a study and they assessed each property in the district based on the size of the lot and the number of dwelling units on it and proposed an assessment. The assessments were, in some cases, very high. The first go-around with them, we got them to realize that, the assessment on the small parcels was too much, and it just wasn't worth it to the individual small property owner to risk that kind of a debt in order to go forward. So we got them to redo it a little bit, and they finally came out with one, and I believe the assessment on the standard residential lot was $365 a year for 30 years. And it went up based. I happen to unfortunately own an acre where I don't use very much water, and my assessment was $2,000 a year. But in the long run, I am going to save money. I won't save much the first year, but over time I will. So I didn't have a problem with it. But there were people that it didn't work for. There were people that had larger parcel, used very little water, and it really wasn't for them. All we could do is tell them, it's not for you, don't vote for it. I mean, that's really all we could do. Our other argument was, well, you're a community member here. Your school district is paying hundreds of thousands of dollars a year for water. All the ball fields are brown, they can't afford the water. So it's in the interest of the community. The city parks are the same way. The Ojai Valley Inn, which is the biggest revenue getter for the city, if they don't have a green golf course, they're not going to attract the kind of customers they do. And that a lot of people who really didn't benefit from it did vote for it because of that. That was just another aspect of it. But what we had to do is redo the feasibility study, because now we had a whole new funding mechanism. So we had to scramble to get a cost-benefit analysis on that approach to funding. And it turned out it actually worked. So we were happy with that. Then we had the election.
Your slides are back on, so if we
Oh.
catch up.
There you go. Go to the next one. Yeah, that's the savings to the community under the original proposal over 15 years, $32 million. And this is 5,000 people, so it's a lot of money. Oh. When the initial feasibility study was published, of course, Golden State jumped in. They held the community meetings and told us why it wouldn't work. But honestly, the only arguments we had from them and from other detractors in and around the community, primarily from the attorneys who said we needed an appraisal and that it's going to cost a lot more than you're saying it's going to cost. They just kind of dismissed us as not knowing what we were talking about. Golden State, they're famous, we are not for sale. They must have said that 1,000 times. It was annoying. We are not for sale. And it's going to cost you $80 million because we have these water rights. And then they had eminent domain is evil. They sent this group of people and they sent out all these flyers about how eminent domain is the government trying to take your private property. So they used those were the only arguments they used. They never questioned how much we would save. They never questioned any of the numbers, any of the claims in the feasibility study. These were their claims. Okay. That was the Casitas proposal. We had the election with the new cost-benefit analysis. The election was a success. 87% of the voters voted for it. And that was a special election, one item on the election, in August when a lot of people aren't around. And we had a turnout of something like 65%. So we really didn't know how it was going to go. I mean, it's very hard to gauge. And we had a little pool going on how much over and under the 2/3 it would be. And we found out it was 87% approval. It made us feel good for one time. And that's when the legal battle began. So they challenged the validity of using Mello-Roos as a funding mechanism. And it has never been heard in court, so this meant it's a new item. There's no history to fall back on. And they hired a battery of lawyers to go after us. Tried to stop the election, that didn't work. They went to court, and after delay after delay after delay, they finally got the first hearing, and they lost that hearing. They appealed that to the appellate court. Again, delay, delay, delay. Didn't have time to prepare this, didn't have time for that. And I mean, they had $800 an hour lawyers they were using. And they lost the appellate hearing. And then they waited until the final day and they filed an appeal to the California Supreme Court. And we weren't sure where it was going to go from there. Our biggest concern, it would just take forever. We had a pretty strong case, but we were afraid it was going to take forever. Well, fortunately, the California Supreme Court took care of it fairly quickly and just came back and refused to hear it. So that was the end of that. What was happening at the same time, though, is Claremont, another Golden State service area, was trying to take over Golden State. It was a city, and the city early on agreed that they would do it, which seemed like a good thing, because that's what was our problem. We couldn't get anybody to help us. But the city of Claremont said, we'll do it. We have the money. We don't have to have a bond issue. We don't have to have anything. We'll just go in and buy it. They did an appraisal, the state won, and made an offer. Then they went to condemnation. It went fairly quickly, but it was all happening during the time we were in this appeal process. Well, Claremont went to the condemnation hearing, and the judge, first thing he asked, who's going to replace Golden State as a service provider? And Claremont said, well, the city will. Well, you don't have expertise in that. You don't have a staff. You don't have any experience in operating the system. How are you going to do that? Because the judge has to be assured there will be no break in service when those keys are turned over. It's in the public interest to have water service. It may cost a lot, but it's paramount that they have service, so you have to have somebody to provide that. Well, they went back and they made a deal with a neighboring town, Laverne, I believe, smaller town, that did provide water service. And they came back, and the judge said, no, they're too small, they still don't have the expertise to run this large water system. The next question was, hey, you have claimed that the system is in disrepair. How do you intend to fund the repairs? And the city said, well, I don't know, we'll deal with that later. The judge said, no, you have to deal with that now, and he threw it out. That was the end. Well, when that ended, I wasn't privy to the negotiations between Golden State and Casitas, but they started to talk because Golden State had filed a condemnation claim and the hearing was set for May, sometime in May. And they started to talk early in February. And then we found out that the condemnation hearing had been postponed, and a few days after that they had reached a settlement. So on June 7th, Casitas took over the keys. This was the result. We estimated it would cost a total of $41 million, and that estimate was done in 2010. Total cost, $44 million. $4 million of that was for uncollected receivables, ramp charges. Debt service, we estimated 2.6 mil. And it came out to real close to I think it's 2.67 is what the debt service is. Capital improvements range from 14 to 21 million. Casitas settled for $10 million in capital improvements. The estimated first year savings of almost $1 million, $900,000. The first year savings in reality is 1.2 million. 10 years, we said it would save 20 million, and in reality will save 26 million and change. So the average customer is going to save $50 to $25 in the first year, and that'll ratchet up very quickly what their realized savings will be over time. You know, it's hard. You know, it's over now, so we don't have anybody to go back and say, well, this is what the rate is now. But we do have those projections that we can look at to determine what it is. And we know one of the reasons Golden State settled in June was because they had postponed filing another rate case, and they didn't want to deal with us. So we were facing another rate increase, Plus, we received a rate increase from the last one retroactive to January 2017. To give you an idea of what they did, my average water bill for 2 months was about $500, $500 to $600. My last bill from them was for 40 days, was $1,350. Because I had to pay retroactive, I had to pay the rate increase back to January. They had RAM charge after RAM charge and surcharge. And then they implemented a water conservation program that added another $5 per unit if you went over a certain amount. So I was paying over $10 a unit for water when they finally went away. Anyway, the last one there. Like I said before, all the documents that we produced, there are essentially 3 additions to the feasibility study. There's the first one, the original, then there was one in 2013 that I think it's called cost-benefit analysis that went over the Casitas bond proposal. And then there was a third that we did when we found out Golden State was going to take over because the rates had changed so much. We spent a lot of time trying to make sure that we kept the public informed. You know, we had a lot of personal pride in it, so we wanted to make sure it was still working. So we spent a lot of time going back and letting people know what the final results were going to be. Anyway, with that, I'll entertain any questions that you have.
So it's kind of a two-part question. A, was or is Ojai having issues with water shortage?
Yes.
Okay. And what is the water source?
We have groundwater as our primary source, and then Casitas Municipal Water District has a lake, surface water. Those are our 2 sources.
Okay. And is that a long-term solution to be able to have water for the length of this agreement?
I don't understand. You mean for
Is there any need to resource other sources of water?
Yeah, the entire area that Casitas serves, City of Ventura and all of those, they're working on some supplemental sources, yes.
And could you share with us what those are?
Well, one of them is import water from the state. Casitas has an allocation for that. We just need the pipe, which is expensive. Their other is to develop some more groundwater sources. And I'm not privy to what else they're planning on doing. We're not out of water yet, but
Well, we are.
yes.
So if you said add a 0, and it gives you approximately what the cost would be for us comparing these apples to apples.
Yeah, all the numbers I gave you, I just, with what I know about what you're doing, population, service area, and dollars, if you add a 0, you're in the right.
So the tax assessment for the Ojai folks is $360 per year.
For the small unit, for all
Small
small.
user.
Yeah.
So does that mean ours would be $3,600 a year?
I don't know, it could be, I don't know.
Pretty important.
Yeah, and it depends on the funding mechanism, depends on a lot of things. I would suggest a water surcharge is a lot better way to go. If you can get whatever agency is going to take over to agree to the revenue bonds with a surcharge, it's fair. The property assessments have problems.
I want to dispel just one thought. We have a larger customer base to deal with the scale you're talking about. So the scale of the numbers add 0. The scale of the customer base also adds 0. That means the unit costs are kind of in the ballpark.
Should stay the same.
Yeah, it was one of our biggest problems. We were so small. That's why our rates were so high. And they were trying to collect so much money from such a small customer base that, if you were to start a business with a customer base that size, you wouldn't do it. It wouldn't pay. You'd sell it off to somebody else. So, yeah, the size makes a big difference. Big difference. Yeah.
So the city of Ojai is fortunate enough to have you prepare this feasibility study, which is quite a complex undertaking. Now, I don't believe that we are so fortunate as to have some of you here. Any ideas for how we come here?
Well, the audience, the primary audience for our feasibility study was the Casitas Water District Board of Directors. Because we had to convince them that this was safe and a worthwhile endeavor on their part. One of our purposes is to get this off of our plate and hand it to somebody else that had the resources to carry it forward. So that was a key audience for that feasibility study. They would have done one, but they accepted the one we had. So if you have an agency that has the resources to do a feasibility study, that's the avenue I would take. We just didn't have that. They wouldn't do it.
Is Oregon State Water an independent company with a subsidiary much larger?
I think it's part of American Water, just like...
No.
It's not?
American Water is a wholly owned subsidiary that runs services in various districts, 6 or 7 in California. Golden State's very similar, except I don't think they're a wholly owned subsidiary. They're a separate company that runs water supply systems in a number of California districts, areas.
So they're like American Water.
Well, they're their own corporation in California. I don't know if there's a holding company about that. I don't know.
I think there is. I don't know what their name is, but it's a national company. They're into power, sewer service, all kinds of things.
How much did your feasibility study cost, and how long did it take to conduct?
It didn't cost, it cost me. I did it pro bono, and it took me about 4 months.
How much would it cost if somebody had, if that wasn't the case?
That's hard number. It would be in the $30,000 to $50,000 range, I imagine.
How long did it take?
4 months.
Thank you.
Do we have any sense of an agency that might take over?
Yes, it's the Water Management District, the existing Water Management District. What I'm hearing today and trying to process some of the information, they had an agency that was capable of doing it and unwilling to take it on. We have something similar to that. There's a difference though. They had a Casitas district that ran a water system. We have an agency that does not run a water system. So that's a little bit of a dilemma we have about how do we move forward. The case that Claremont had is a cautionary tale for us. The court ruled that because the city had no experience in running a water system, it could not justify the decision to buy it because they couldn't guarantee that it was going to, be in the public interest to have an inexperienced agency running it. That was the Claremont experience. Claremont also did a lousy job in presenting its case. So there's a soft spot in that final conclusion. But for us here, we're asking the Water Management District, who has all the authority to do it, all the legal rights to do it, all the ability to do it. The question is, since they've never run a water system before, is that such an important negative that it's a steeper hill for us to climb, or it's a steeper hill for them to climb? It's a significant issue for us, and that's exactly why discussions about feasibility is important. So we need to have those discussions. And the people around Cal-Am, people who support Cal-Am or that blindly support Cal-Am, do not want the discussion. We were told at a recent Water Management District meeting, forget these people. Ignore these people. The argument was, don't listen to any discussion. We stand behind our numbers. Every number we come out, the handouts are out there. Every one of them. We stand behind those numbers. We want a public discussion of this issue. That's another reason why we might protest the Cal-Am board meeting on Wednesday, because behind closed doors, who knows what happens. Just put some light on this stuff. That's what we're trying to do. That's what we're hoping for.
Would you be willing to comment on the situation that we have here that's a little different, that we don't have the experience? But given all the other pluses we have, would you want to share your thoughts?
5:30 on Wednesday.
Yeah, it's a significant problem because when, especially if you go all the way to condemnation, the company that you take actually just walks away. And Golden State, they were cordial with Casitas under this particular, at the end. I mean, as cordial as they could be. But they literally hand you the keys and walk away. So you've got to have somebody to take over operation. Now, we looked at a lot of other ways to do it. One was contracted out. You know, that's something you can examine. There are companies out there who will operate water and sewer facilities on a contractual basis. You can check with some of the ones that I know. City of Fillmore, City of Santa Paula, and Ventura County have done that with wastewater. So there are companies that do that. They bring in certified operators and all that sort of thing.
Thank you.
The other way is you form your own district, and this is a tough one. This is the one that a lot of people wanted to do. I didn't want to do it because I was afraid I'd have to run it. You could form a district, and it becomes complicated now, because now you're dealing with LAFCO, the county. I mean, there's other approvals that you have to do these kind of things. But you could have an election, you could set an assessment to collect money and start hiring people. You know, so you've got a staff ready to go and are trained. But that's a lot of work, and it's a lot of upfront money, and they're going to make you spend as much upfront money as they can make you spend. The water, what is it, a water conservation district? What is the? Water management district. They certainly have the authority to do it. You know, it's really convincing them that it's in their best interest to staff up and train people and have them basically sitting there waiting to do this. You know.
Good, I just want to know if there were options, it looks like there are options.
Yes.
Well, there were people working on that water system for Golden State. They still needed their jobs. Did any of them keep their jobs when it went to Casitas?
No.
Why not?
And because when Golden State, at whatever point they decided they were going to lose, they started rotating people out. Basically kept it, you know, their best people and sent them somewhere else and replaced them with new people who weren't that experienced. So Casitas originally was going to hire most of them, but they decided not to. I think they're looking at hiring some of them now, but you can't count on that. All I'm saying is you can't count on those experienced people that are running it now to be here when that day comes, because Cal American has the ability to move those people out.
A question for George. So when we look at who could take it over, and we look at other water districts like Molina or Salinas is publicly owned, why can't we look at these other water providers that are public agencies?
It's possible for a district, like, the water management district, to contract with somebody else to run it. That's possible. But to ask them to take it over is totally inconsistent with the law and the jurisdiction and the interest and so on.
But it sounds like that's what they did. They went to the neighboring agency to take it over. So what's the difference on this, I'm asking?
The Casitas Water District existed in that same community, running a water system right next door to Golden State.
Right.
That's the same community. That's like City Grove having its water system, but the rest of the district not. So you have existing something, take something
But
over.
doesn't Molina run up to
No.
Allen?
No, big difference. In saying anything in Salinas had the same problem. There are no common boundaries. The difference is the Water Management District was formed in response to a problem with Cal-Am in the 70s with conservation needs. Low water availability and conservation rationing problems. So the Water Management District was formed in 77, I believe, in response to Cal-Am's poor response to the dilemma in the community. And it was created with the assumption that it had the authority to buy Cal-Am, proceed with public ownership, had all the jurisdictions to be able to do that, and the assumption was they were going to move in that direction. They just never did.
Did your county have a county water works?
No,
Public works?
no, everything's contracted out, special districts, corporate, water supply. There's no county license.
Our county does the water works, that contracts with the county staff.
Yeah, we don't have it. Any other questions? Any from me? Any about this, where we're going? Do you have any just feedback at all on where we're headed? Yes.
Yeah, Mr. Riley, for you actually, on one of your documents that you're distributing in the back, I'm just curious because I'm a bit, you say that these graphs and numbers they're predicated on a total monthly bill for a family of 4 using 81 gallons of water per person per day. Who on the Monterey Peninsula is using 81 gallons of water a day?
Your question is one of interest because we didn't do the chart. We picked up that chart because Marina Coast was doing the chart. The issue we kind of support is that there's a common foundation for all the numbers. Granted, it's a little high based on everybody's assumption about current water use. But the calculations in that chart is based on the use of 81 gallons per person per day. That's it. It runs out to about a tier 3 system for our comparison.
But so we know though that we're not using anywhere near 81 gallons of water. The only reason I point it out is it can, people say, well, you can tell any story you want to tell with the numbers. You work the numbers, you make it say whatever you want to say. So when we're showing how much higher our bills are than everyone else, that number is really based on a false figure.
It's based on a common figure. Whether it's false or not.
Common where? Not here.
It's based on 81 gallons per person per month.
So in LA, where they probably are using more than 81 gallons a day per person per household, it would have more relevance than the Monterey Peninsula, where in our household we use 39 gallons of water a day each.
I know, and the usage is way low. You've raised an important question, I think, and what we need to do is go back and look, and can we create a chart that looks more relevant to the community? Right now, it is based on fact. It's just a high fact. But it is common. I mean, those are the rates. What's really interesting, I think, in that chart is that Felton, when you add the cost of buying the system to the rates that exist, and that's the little asterisk on our chart, when you add that on to the rates, the water rates, we are still far less expensive than Cal-Am, which has no ownership in it. It's just Felton with the water and the purchase price are still way less than the cost of Cal-Am.
Thank you for responding, I appreciate it.
But you've raised an interesting question for us to do. Thank you. Anything else? We're done? Oh, we're not. Here.
Are your slides you showed, are they on the website? No, they're not. I just made them up, yeah. But all of the information, I would suggest go through the feasibility study because it has detailed charts and it's relatively easy to read. It's not, I tried to make it so it didn't sound like a calendar. But there's a lot of stuff on there. I think there's charts on there and that sort of thing.
Yes, sir.
How does the feasibility study for this area pay
We're asking the Water Management District to undertake a formal study. Because it's a little bit like Richard, it's a voluntary effort at this point. Everything we've done, we don't have the skill set of knowing the background that he did. He had 30 years in the water district. We don't. So we're doing the best we can of taking Cal-Am's numbers, simplifying them, presenting them, and showing how we think we can afford to buy Cal-Am. And of course, there are lots of reasons why we want to do that beyond the numbers, but the numbers are important. But we stand behind our numbers. We even stand behind the chart that's been challenged. That's not a problem to us. But to do an official, more detailed analysis of what's possible and what's likely, that's a feasibility study that needs to be formally done, and that's why we're asking, that's our petition's all about, asking the Water Management District to do that. Actually demanding that they do that. Yes?
So it seems like, following on what the numbers can tell any story you want to, the feasibility study sounds very important. We were getting advice to value every nut and bolt and valve in the system and realize don't do it that way. It seems to me if the wrong person does a feasibility study, it can really have a large impact on whether this is workable or not.
We may make an offer to this guy.
I would advise you, there's two things that whoever does it has to be very careful. Make sure you hire a good attorney, an attorney that understands condemnation of a public utility, because it's a different animal, and most attorneys, although they may have a lot of knowledge about a typical eminent domain case where the city takes a private piece of land, a public utility condemnation process is completely different. The other is make sure whoever hires the appraiser, you'll have to do an appraisal, the court requires it, but Ojai-Casitas hired an appraiser who specialized in this type of a take. So it's very important that you have the right appraiser and the right attorney to do that.
Yes.
Richard, you said that the judge was considered the issue of the public interest in receiving water, no interruptions, et cetera, was important. It's clear, I mean, we've been through so much, it's so clear that these private water companies are not operating in the public interest. Have you heard of any case where you take them to court on the grounds that they're simply not operating in the public interest, or is it the fact that as long as water is coming through the pipes, then they're operating?
But it's a dilemma for them. The court will approve of eminent domain taking only if that taking is in the public's best interest. So it has to consider, will the new operator be able to provide a lifeline service? It's a base, absolute necessary service. It's the same issue that PUC deals with. Golden State or Cal American goes to the PUC and says, I need $10 million to build this facility, and if I don't, you're going to threaten water supply to these people. PUC, we're not going to do that. And the judge will say the same thing. So we were a little concerned that the judge would not accept the fact that we would simply get lower rates as being in the public's best interest. But we were. But it was so dramatic, the savings, that we think we would have won. We didn't go to court on that, so we don't know for sure. But you're right. You might want to think about if you have other issues. Just a background. A month before the election, to approve the $60 million in bonds, Golden State had a mainline water break on Main Street that flooded the just newly renovated historic theater in Ojai. And that theater is still closed because there's a lawsuit between Golden State and the theater owner. 2 weeks later, on the hottest day of the year, they had another mainline break on the other main thoroughfare through Ojai, and everyone in the service area was without water, and they had to issue a boil water order. So those kind of events are important. They're very important to the voter, because I think that's one of the reasons we have such a high approval. But if you can document those kind of things, your attorney, whoever handles the eminent domain, they can tell you how valuable they are. We avoided it because it was so subjective in many cases. It's like water quality. Yeah, the water quality we have is not very good because it's groundwater, high TDS, hard. Well, that isn't going to change. So You just have to be careful what they are. We did go to the PUC at the last rate hearing. I testified at that one. And we demonstrated that Golden State was not performing some of the basic requirements under AWWA, which is the American Water Works Association, requirements for operating a domestic water supply. They had no valve maintenance program, and they had no valve record program, and we claimed that that's why that theater was flooded, because it took them almost 6 hours to shut the valve, couldn't find it. They also, we got the fire department, retired firemen, to testify that they didn't maintain the fire hydrants the way they were supposed to, and they didn't. They could not produce their records. They hired a contractor to come in and do all of that quickly before the rate hearing was up. But and there are records there that the commission's staff recommended that all of the PUC regulated utilities perform those operations or suffer penalties. I don't think it's gone anywhere. So that's something you can look at to see if Cal American's doing that. They may, I don't know. I don't know much about them.
Everybody done? Because we're at the end. If you want to repeat, you can come and I want to just remind everybody that if you're willing to open your house to your neighbors and so on, we're looking for people who are willing to help us do that this fall. Turn your name in the front. Thank you very much.